Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano, and I'm glad you could join me today. I have a fantastic guest. Before I bring on the guest, make sure to go to the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com, and share this episode with your family and friends and on social media. I have the author of The Indispensable Right, Free Speech in the Age of Rage. He is probably one of the most fair-minded people I follow, and everyone needs to check out jonathanturley.org to get some insightful analysis, probably the best out there. Professor Turley, I want to thank you for joining me. How are you today?
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be with you.
Well, you have such an important book out, and I want to tell the audience, everyone needs to read this book because freedom of speech has been under attack. It's only getting worse out there. And in your book, you state that it's coming from a variety of sources out there, this attack, the assault we're witnessing on the First Amendment. So can you explain to the audience how it's coming under attack in the first place?
Absolutely. This book is about 30 years in the making, but one of the reasons I decided to publish it is because we are living through what I think is the most dangerous anti-free speech period in our history. And the reason is that we have a type of triumvirate, an alliance of government and corporate and academia interests supporting this vast censorship effort. And it's without question the largest censorship system in history. It is a system that allows not just banning from social media, but throttling. There's now support for blacklisting as something coming from the left that is really ironic. The left was the target of blacklisting and censorship during the McCarthy period. And now that they have control of parts of the government, they're turning that on their political opponents. And so we can't underestimate the potential damage from this movement. And one of the things the book does is it talks about our history and our struggle with free speech. And we have had other periods of rage. People often cite my reference to this as the age of rage, but it's not our first age of rage. And during periods of social disorder and division, free speech is almost always the first to be lost in that struggle. But we have this pendulum swing, and we've been able to recover. We can't assume that that will be the case today. We've never seen the array of forces that have aligned against free speech.
And I think that's a very important point that people miss. When I look at Eisenhower, everyone constantly refers to the military-industrial complex warning, but he also warned how when federal tax dollars are flowing to the university system, that it could be hijacked by the nation's scholars and this alliance that you're talking about. I call it the unholy alliance. I actually wrote a piece for Fox News about it, where we see millions of dollars in government grants flowing to the universities to develop these censorship apparatuses that are being built out.
No, that's right. And to be honest, I would never have thought that we could see this level of orthodoxy and intolerance on our campuses. I've been teaching for 3 decades, but free speech was always the touchstone of higher education. It was the one value we all shared and defended. That's no longer the case. I'm a bit of a dinosaur today. People call me a free speech absolutist. At one time, that was a compliment. Now it is not. And you have many law professors who are now arguing that free speech is a threat to our nation. You have law professors that are pushing an amendment of the First Amendment to get rid of its protection of all speech, individual speech, and to allow the government greater ability to censor citizens. This has become mainstream in academia and now in politics. That it's astonishing to me how far it's gotten. But the one thing about this I say in the book is that, I try to tell this history through the stories of our heroes. And these are compelling figures that often put their lives at stake to defend free speech. And many of them hold views that I find ridiculous or offensive. You have communists, fascists, feminists, every type of political view, some of which I agree with, some of which I don't. But we all agree on one salient fact, that free speech is the indispensable right for the United States. And their stories are very colorful, and they're often very moving about what they were willing to put at risk to protect this indispensable right. And it's important for us to sort of read that unvarnished history because it's in some ways sort of painful. We often believe our press. We often believe that we have been this bastion of free speech. In reality, we've gone through periods in which we arrested and punished those with opposing views, and we're seeing that happen again.
And I think your book points that out in a phenomenal way, because we tend to have that nostalgic view of the past, that everything in the past was better, that everything in the past we were more unified, that the past is always better than the present, and that's not true. We faced our struggles back in the past, and there were periods where it was actually worse off, and so we have to keep that in mind. And Professor, you do highlight well the concerns within academia, and I want to talk to you more about that when we get back. We're going to take a quick break, everyone. We'll be right back with Professor Jonathan Turley. Are you prepared for the unexpected? As a former emergency manager, being prepared is not a choice, it's a necessity, and that's where the Wellness Company comes in. Imagine having the peace of mind that you're equipped to handle any medical crisis, from tick bites to the latest pandemic. The Wellness Company's medical emergency kit is your lifeline, packed with essential medications like ivermectin, emergency antibiotics, antivirals, and more. This kit is your ultimate preparedness solution. The Wellness Company's team of renowned medical professionals, including Dr. Peter McCullough, Dr. James Thorpe, Dr. Harvey Risch, Dr. Drew Pinsky, and more. They are truth-seeking doctors, and they have designed a kit that sets the gold standard for safety and prevention. Don't wait for the next crisis to strike. Visit twc.health/PAS and use promo code PAS for an exclusive 10% discount just for being a listener of this show. Prepare today, rest easy tomorrow. Use code PAS at checkout. Welcome back, everyone. So, Professor Turley, you about the concerns within academia. From those within academia, I'm always struck by what some of the college elite, the professors, are putting out there. And I go back to this article that I read in The Atlantic. It was written by two professors, one from Harvard, one from the University of Arizona, where they argued that when it comes to control over the internet, that China has largely gotten it right and America has gotten it wrong, and that we should adopt a more communist Chinese approach when it comes to regulating the internet. To me, that's remarkable. So I want to know from you, I mean, these are people from our profession. Did you ever imagine that you'd hear people from our own profession argue that?
No, I didn't. And it's really otherworldly. You also have many law professors who are saying that, a couple of Georgetown law professors said that we have to move beyond constitutionalism. Others have called the Constitution trash. That's how you get published today. That's how you get tenure today. Most faculties in this country have at most one or two Republicans or conservatives. My faculty is a good example of that. There's been a purging of opposing voices. So faculties today run from the left to the far left. But
I don't mean to interrupt you for a sec, but I think what you just said is really important, because when did the idea of promoting the Constitution and celebrating the First Amendment become a Republican or conservative thing? Like, that used to be an American thing. When did it become oh, well, you must be right wing if you believe these things?
No, that is a fascinating thing. And if you want to get published, just write a piece saying free speech is harmful or triggering, or the First Amendment has to go. You will have law reviews lining up to publish you. They do not want a piece that says free speech has served us well and we need to protect it. Generally, that's not considered cutting edge. And I don't know how we lost control so quickly. There is, however, something I hope in the book that is positive. I really am an optimist. And part of what the book argues is that the problems we've had with free speech came with a sort of original sin after the Republic was formed. Most people don't realize that the First Amendment was and still is a revolutionary provision. No one had ever protected free speech as was embodied in that amendment. And even today, as I mentioned, law professors are calling for it to be amended, that it's too radical. But what was interesting to me in going back and looking at that period is that many of those supporting the First Amendment believe that free speech, as I do, is an autonomous right. It's part of natural rights that belong to all human beings. It's not granted by the government. It adheres to you as a human being. And that view came out early on, but was abandoned within a few years as courts under the Adams administration re-embraced what I call a functionalist or Blackstonian view of free speech. That's where our problems began. It allowed for courts to have constant trade-offs, to allow for prosecutions for people with opposing views. But there is a silver lining there. Now, as I say in the book, the nice thing about believing that free speech is a natural right, that we're hardwired for free speech, is that it can never really be extinguished. We may at times lose our appetite for free speech, but we'll never lose the taste for it because it's part of being human. And you see that in polls. People have rejected this unrelenting effort of the media, corporations, academia, politicians to embrace censorship. They're not buying it. And that's because it's in our DNA that we know that if you give up even part of a right, you'll never get it back.
And that's the frightening aspect. One of the things that concerned me greatly, and I know it concerned you as well, was the Richmond product that was developed within the FBI, where it took traditional Catholics and said that they have the potential to be domestic violent extremists because they hold positions that there's two genders, they may be pro-life, and that's where it could be domestic violent extremism. Are you concerned that the government is trying to brand normal positions that people take as extremism? And when we take it from academia to the bureaucracy is the one with the real power. And does that concern you?
Oh, it does. It also concerns me because I do believe that there has been a politicalization of the criminal justice system. I do believe that the Manhattan case targeting Donald Trump was a raw political exercise. I don't even see the crime there. I think ultimately it's likely to be overturned, but initially it's going to have Trump will have a hard time in the New York court system. But there is, in my view, evidence of a two-tier system coming out of these prosecutions that we need to discuss. We need to debate as a people. This is a serious threat. And, maybe President Biden is right when he says democracy's on the ballot, but I don't think he's right about what that means. I mean, what we're seeing with the attacks on free speech, the politicalization of the criminal justice system do raise serious concerns about the future of our democracy.
It certainly does. And something that went under the radar was the 2021 National Strategy for Countering Domestic Terrorism, where in it stated that those expressing any anti-government or anti-authority sentiment could potentially be domestic violent extremists. But the problem is they never defined what is anti-government sentiment and what is anti-authority sentiment. And it used to be they used the term violent anti-government, violent anti-authority. So when it comes to this idea of anti-government and anti-authority, how does that silence people? How does that make people self-censor, essentially, because out of fear, the bureaucracy is going to target them?
Well, the Supreme Court has always said that one of the greatest threats to free speech is the chilling effect on citizens, that they will self-censor. And we have to be concerned about that. The Biden administration has argued that even if a statement is true, it can be disinformation. So they've said that they seek to combat true statements that are being used in a misleading way. Well, think about that for a second and how that can affect our political system. That's the reason I think that this is an issue that transcends party. I think that we need to see an effort to reach out to Democrats and independents and Republicans to say, look, this is part of our legacy. This is who we are. Free speech defines us as a people. And I think what we'll find is that there is a strong majority out there that does not support what the media and politicians have been doing.
Professor, I'm interested to get your take on the student body of today, so I want to talk to you about that. We're going to take a quick break, everyone, so hang tight. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. So, Professor Turley, when my audience knows this well, when students enter my class, I give them a citizenship exam, and only 6% of the student body can pass a basic citizenship exam. You're in the classroom, you speak to students. We see on a regular basis the thorough lack of knowledge when it comes to how the American government actually works. It's set up, the intent behind the system, what are our enumerated rights and liberties that we get to express, our God-given liberties, what a free society is really about. Do you believe that the failures in the education system is what has led us to this moment, or do you think something else is going on?
Much of what I discuss in the book is traced back to problems in our educational system. Much of this anti-free speech movement began on our campuses, including groups like Antifa. Antifa is known as a violent, sort of left-wing group. Most people don't understand that if you look at the Antifa handbook, it is an organization that has always been based on an anti-free speech movement. They are first and foremost opposed to free speech. They don't believe in it. They believe that they should silence people. And that deplatforming cancel culture took hold on our campuses. And so you have a generation that has been raised of speech phobics who've been told since grade school that free speech is harmful and that it's triggering and it's endangering to them. And so that's what they know. So when they hear an opposing view, they are triggered because they've been largely protected from it. One of the things I talk about in the book is when I went to University of Chicago as an undergraduate, I loved it because it was like the scene out of Star Wars in the bar. It seemed like every exotic, different viewpoint was on campus. And I loved every minute of it. I thought most of them were absolutely crazy, but I loved listening to them because it exposed a way that we could look at the same thing and see something vastly different. We simply don't have that today. People who go to college are given a very narrow range of views by professors that are increasingly intolerant of opposing views. And I feel sorry for them because that's not what higher education is supposed to be. And we've really not only gypped them out of a great college experience, but we have turned them into these speech phobics where they're not prepared to hear opposing views.
And why do you think professors have become so intolerant? I mean, when I went to college, I had many far left professors, but they loved to have debates. I mean, they loved when I would talk in class and we'd clash on viewpoints. Like, they enjoyed it. They got something from it, and they really valued education. What's changed amongst the professors?
Nicholas, it's hard to say because I've thought about that a lot because I never thought we would reach this point. Part of it is that you now have to legitimate yourself in academia. You have people who start every meeting with land acknowledgments or saying that they're racist or just making these public confessions. There's an effort to sort of show I'm bona fide. But also the faculties are replicating their own views. And so I have seen incredibly talented conservative candidates who have been rejected, even though their credentials are really stellar. And instead, you get a lot of far left academics. And the farther the left, the more likely they're going to get an appointment. And the result is that they reach this critical mass. And in some respects, I feel sort of like I was naive. When I first came into teaching, I remember one of the first fights I had on the faculty was to get a critical feminist on the faculty. I wanted even though I disagree with her views, I wanted my students to have someone on the faculty that was on the far left. And the result was that many of those same people, including that person, became intolerant for opposing views. Once they got on the faculty, they did everything they could to prevent others with more conservative views from getting on the faculty. And we reached this critical mass, I think, around maybe 10, 15 years ago. You started to really see the acceleration of this purging at universities. And now, if a faculty selects one conservative, it's considered an amazing moment today. And it usually does not happen. According to self-surveys, these are self-identification. Many faculties, about 40% in one survey I think might have been sociology, didn't have a single conservative or Republican on the faculty. I remember reading a Harvard Crimson article where they were interviewing the last known registered Republican on campus, and the guy was like 90 years old, and they interviewed him like he was this alien body where they did everything but sort of poke him with sticks. And you sort of look at that and you think, how did we get to the point that being a Republican faculty member on campus, and I'm sure there's still others, but that this was so notable that the Crimson did a whole layout on meet the Republican on campus?
Well, it's amazing because even if they're not Republican, at campus reform, we've reported on the idea of the professor out of Harvard. I can't recall his name off the top of my head, where he did the study of police shootings. And he found that, wow, it's not really based on race at all. It has nothing to do with race. And he wasn't some hardcore conservative or a hardcore Republican. He was actually a Democrat. He was actually far to the left, and he was savage. And so now we see 80% of people on college campuses report that they self-censor because they're afraid. That's not America. Now, in your book, you talk about how we need to overcome this, what we could start doing to bring back the appreciation for free speech. So can you tell the audience what they, as ordinary Americans, can start doing?
Yeah, I didn't want to just write a book on the history and meaning of free speech. I wanted to actually talk about concrete steps we can take to restore this right. And so the last part of the book looks at that, and some of them can be done and can be done quickly. One is that Congress needs to pass a law that bans any money, a single dollar of federal funds that can be spent by agencies to support the censorship or blacklisting of individuals or groups, to simply get the government out of the business of censorship. Now, look, Mayorkas at Homeland Security can go and use his department to respond to critics. He can denounce people who he thinks are spreading disinformation. That's called free speech. That's great. Go ahead and do it. But what you can't do, and you shouldn't be able to do, is to enlist surrogates by funding through grants these censorship systems. We need to get the government out of that business. We also need to get government in the business of enhancing free speech by tying grants to educational institutions to their adherence to what I list as 10 simple principles that any university should be able to meet to protect free speech on campus. If these universities were discriminating against people based on their race or religion, we would be appalled that we were giving them billions of dollars in federal funds. We should be equally appalled that we're doing that if they're denying people free speech. And so we can use that power of the purse to protect free speech. We also need to reinforce state universities. The last bastion, the last line of defense for free speech in this country may end up public universities, because the First Amendment applies directly to what they do. And it's getting increasingly difficult to tell students who are conservative or libertarian that they should go to some of these private universities that are so hostile to those views. We need to reinforce public universities. So legislatures need to say, look, we're not a captive audience. You can't have a university that excludes voices, that only hears liberal viewpoints, that replicates itself, and then you come to us every year and demand that we fund you for it. You need to show us that you have a diversity of thought, including on your faculty, or we're going to start to withhold money.
I completely agree with that, especially I'm part of the SUNY system here in New York when you look at the DEI degree requirements. So I think even public universities, when we see things like that, we see the corruption within college. Do you think that's what's led to only 36% of Americans having a favorable view of higher education at this point?
I think it has. I hear from people all the time that they don't want to spend all of this money so that their kids can go and listen to these, radical lessons, but more importantly, not be allowed to speak in their own voice. And I can understand that. You have schools like UCLA that are now hiring advocates, activists on the faculty. Their whole job is being activists. You have other schools that are awarding degrees in activism. And it's changing the way people view higher education. Most people want a classic education. It's the faculty and administrators that want to convert higher education into this echo chamber of activism. And it's not selling well. It's not selling well in the media either. These reporters that have embraced what's called advocacy journalism are killing their media outlet. I mean, Washington Post has lost tens of millions of dollars, and they've gone, with this advocacy journalism. The new publisher is under attack because he dropped a truth bomb on the journalist and said, quote, "Nobody's reading your stuff." That's his direct quote. He said, "We've lost half of our audience, half of our readership. We're losing tens of millions of dollars. We can't go on like this." So in both academia and the media, this is actually disastrous. People are walking away, but they still, as individuals, have an interest to continue this level of advocacy, even though it's killing their institutions.
Well, all of them should be required to read The Indispensable Right. I mean, that's what it comes down to. Professor Turley, you are the indispensable professor. That's what we have to say. Much. And I really appreciate you joining me today. Everyone, get the book, read it, understand it, absorb it. It's so important in this day and age. Professor Turley, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at PASreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.